If you had told Mama Olana that her daughter would be the reason for her death, that her last sight on earth would be something so terrifying that her mouth won't even close in death, she would have cursed you and told you to kneel for forgiveness. But on the Tuesday it happened, even the wind in Amiife village paused. That morning had begun like any other mornings. The sun climbed lazily over the red roofs of Anambra, casting long shadows over the clay roads. Birds chirped, goats roamed freely, and Mama Olana was already outside by 6 a.m. Sweeping the compound with her back bent and wrapper tied tightly across her chest. She was 62, a widow, proud, firm and respected, the kind of woman who carried grief in one hand and prayer in the other. Her only child, her daughter Olana, was her pride. The girl had gone to the university in Enugu, studied microbiology, came back with a diploma and a strange silence. Her eyes no longer lit up the way they used to. She was polite, but something had changed. She spent most of her time indoors, cooking, sleeping, sometimes disappearing for days and returning without explanation. "Where did you go?" Mama had asked her once. "To where peace calls," Olana had replied without blinking. The answer never sat right with her, but Mama didn't press. She chalked it up to post-graduation stress, or maybe the loneliness that came after school when jobs failed to show up. But it was more. One night, Mama had woken up to a strange smell. Something burnt, bitter, not like food, not even like herbs. It was heavier, like something forbidden. She tiptoed into the backyard where her daughter had been cooking late. The pot was covered, steaming. Olana stood in front of it, whispering. "Mama," her daughter had stayed, looking startled. "Why are you awake?" "I smelled something." Mama eyed the pot. "What are you cooking this night?" "Nothing, just pepper soup. You know I've been sick." "That sickness excuse again?" The pot remained covered. Mama wanted to lift the lid, but her daughter stepped in front of it quickly. "I'll bring it inside, Mama. Go and sleep." That night, Mama couldn't sleep. Something tugged at her soul. Long ago, when Olana was only 10 years old, a strange woman had come to their compound during one of those long Harmattan holidays. She sold herbs and saw visions. People in the village whispered that she once disappeared for 3 days and returned with river water in her eyes. She took one look at young Olana, held her hand and said, "This child's pot must never be stirred without prayer." "What nonsense is this?" Mama had asked, shoving her hand away. But the woman had insisted. "Her path will cross a place that looks like light but smells like meat. You must guard her, especially what she cooks." Back then, Mama had laughed it off. She had even insulted the woman for bringing bad luck to a child's name. But now, with the things she had been hearing, with the dreams she had been having. On the early Tuesday morning it happened. Olana left the house early. She told Mama she was going to Oye market to buy catfish for lunch. But she didn't return until late evening, and when she did, she had no fish. Just a small black nylon bag. Her mother asked, "Where is the catfish?" Olana said nothing. She walked straight into the kitchen. That was when the noise started. Not the kind of noise that plates make when they fall. Not even the kind of noise pots make when they boil over. It was the kind of noise that came with chanting, faint, low male voices. Mama turned to look at the front door. No visitors and no radio. But she could hear men speaking in low tunes from the kitchen. She rose slowly, her wrapper now loose around her waist, her heart pounding like a talking drum. She walked to the kitchen door and stopped. She could smell it again, that same bitter burnt scent. Then she heard something else, a strange clink, like metal hitting bone. Her daughter was laughing softly. Mama pushed open the kitchen door, and that was when she saw it. The pot. Olana didn't hear her mother enter. She stood in front of the black large pot, her head bowed, whispering a chant that didn't sound like Igbo. Her eyes were closed. Her left hand held a red feather. Her right hand dipped something into the pot. Mama moved closer. What she saw in the pot made her freeze. Inside the boiling water were teeth, human teeth, and something worse. Something that looked like a hand, a child's hand, blackened by heat, its fingers curled up as though still in pain. Mama's breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, tried to run, but her feet betrayed her. Olana looked up slowly and smiled. Mama, you weren't supposed to see this. And then, Mama's mouth opened wide, horrified, confused, desperate for air, but no words came out. Not a scream, not a cry, not a question. Her heart stopped beating before she hit the floor. She collapsed by the kitchen door, eyes wide open, her mouth open. Her last sight was the pot, the cursed pot. The kitchen was silent, so silent you could hear the hiss of the dying firewood and the thick pop of oil cooling in the cursed black pot. Mama Olana's body lay sprawled at the doorway, one arm twisted under her back, her eyes wide open, her mouth frozen in the horror of what she saw. And Olana, she just stood there blinking, her hand still holding the red feather. The pot continued to steam. "Why now?" she whispered. "Why did you come in, Mama? You weren't supposed to see this, not yet." She moved slowly to her mother's body and crouched beside her. Her breath had become shallow. Her chest rose and fell like someone being suffocated by memories. She reached out and closed her mother's eyes, but not the mouth. She couldn't close that. The image was too powerful, too final. It all started with a woman named Auntie Wamma, and this was 3 months earlier. She was not a blood relative, just a woman Olana met during her NYSC in Nsukka, a tall, soft-spoken woman who dressed in all white and claimed she was gifted by the rivers. Olana had met her at a prayer retreat where she had gone seeking deliverance from strange dreams. Dreams where she was eating things she didn't cook. Dreams where she walked barefoot through graveyards, followed by crying children she couldn't see. At the retreat, the pastor had prayed, screamed, thrown anointing oil, but the dreams continued. It was one man who approached her after the 3rd day. "My dear, your problem is not for shouting," she said calmly. "Your problem is spiritual depth." "Spiritual depth?" Olana asked. "Yes, you inherited a covenant you didn't sign, but you must pay it or the spirit will collect what belongs to them." A month after she returned to Amefe, Olana visited Wamma again, this time not for prayers but for answers. That was when the rituals began. It started innocently. Boil ginger, add alligator pepper, bathe by moonlight, say the names of her ancestors backwards. But then it grew darker. She was told to stop eating salt for 21 days, to avoid entering the church, to start sleeping on a mat instead of a mattress. Each time she completed a step, she felt strangely lighter, as though something heavy had left her body. And then came the final instruction. "The pot," Wamma said, "you must cook with the pot they give you. You must feed the fire with which you have been avoiding memory, pain, and sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" Olana asked. Wamma smiled gently. "Someone who knows you must witness, not die, just witness, so that the spirit will see that you are not hiding." But now, Mama had seen more than she was supposed to see. She had seen the pot itself. The sacrifice had turned fatal, and that changed everything. Olana stood up and looked down at her mother's body. It was almost night. Flies had begun to gather. The air smelled of smoke and death. She wrapped her mother's body in a wrapper and dragged it into the parlor. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks, but there was no weeping, only panic. She knew if the villagers found her mother like this, they would burn her alive. Amefe was quiet on the surface, but full of secrets. People watched, and they talked. People killed in the name of tradition. And Olana knew that no matter what, the story had to change. The pot had to be hidden. That night, as crickets screamed and lanterns flickered in the wind, Olana made a call. She hadn't called Wamma in weeks, but tonight she needed her. The phone rang once and twice, then Wamma answered. "I saw her," Olana whispered, her voice shaking. "She saw the pot. She felt that she's dead." There was silence on the line. Then Wamma said, "Wrap her mouth. Do it now, before her spirit calls witnesses." "What do you mean?" "If her mouth stays open, the ancestors will come, and they won't ask questions before punishing." Olana dropped the phone. She grabbed a white scarf and tied it around her mother's jaw, forcing it closed. And then she waited. But the air had changed. The night felt thicker, like someone else had entered the compound. At 6 a.m., a knock came on the front gate. It was Mama Neka, a gossiping neighbor who fetched water early and never minded her business. Olana, good morning. I no see your mama sweep compound this morning. Hope say she dey okay. Olana smiled through the door. She traveled to my uncle's place in Newi. Sudden visit. Mama Neka squinted. She didn't tell anybody. She left Elima. Okay, greet her for me. But suspicion had already been planted. An old woman like Mama Olana didn't just leave without saying goodbye, not in Amife. And within 2 days, other neighbors started talking. On the third night, Olana couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother standing by the kitchen door, same wrapper, same scarf, but this time her mouth was open again. Why did you cook it? Mama asked in the dream. Why did you stir it? I didn't mean to kill you, Olana cried. Mama didn't blink. Her eyes widened unnaturally until it tore at the corners. You cannot bury me. I am not yours to hide. Olana woke up screaming. And the pot? It was bubbling again on its own, but she had not lit the fire. On the 5th day, a knock came again, but it wasn't Mama Neka. It was Inspector Okoro from the local police unit. He entered the compound with 2 other officers. We got a tip that Mama Olana is missing. People said she hadn't been seen for days. Olana faked a smile. She traveled to Newi. Which part? Eziama. We called Eziama. Your uncle said she didn't come. Silence. Olana's hand began to shake. We need to look inside, Inspector said. She opened the door slowly, her heart pounding in her throat. They searched bedroom, living room, the store, but they didn't open the back room. The room where the wrapped body lay under a white bedsheet, a Bible placed under her chest to keep the rumors quiet. Then they went to the kitchen, and that was almost the end. One of the officers paused at the pot. What is this smell? Olana rushed forward. It's local medicine. I've been sick. He moved closer, lifted the lid slightly, saw only black liquid and floating leaves. She had removed the remains the night before, just in case. He closed the pot and they left. But outside the compound, as Inspector Okoro stepped outside, he noticed something else. A small bird lying dead beside the kitchen window with its mouth wide open, eyes bulging. He paused, then he looked back at the house. Something no clear here, he murmured. He made a silent decision that they would return, but they would come unannounced. Olana sat in the living room, holding her mother's picture. She had not eaten in 2 days. Her hair was undone, her lips cracked. The house felt cold, too cold. She began to hum a song Mama used to sing while cooking. But halfway through, the lights blinked, and the pot began to boil again, louder this time. She went to the kitchen slowly. The pot was moving. It shook. Then, the lid flipped open by itself, and inside, Mama's face floated, eyes open, mouth stretched. Olana screamed and fainted. When Olana opened her eyes, the floor beneath her was cold. She was lying in the middle of the kitchen, her head inches away from the black pot, whose lid now sat gently closed, as though it had never moved on its own. Her blouse was damp with sweat, her ears rang with the sound of her own scream, and her mother's face, the one she saw inside the boiling water, remained etched into her mind like fire on palm leaves. She sat up slowly. The room was silent now, the walls were still, but the air still felt thick with something unseen, something old. She stumbled to her feet and ran to the back room. The body was still there, wrapped tightly in white bedsheet undisturbed, but that brought her no comfort. Because if Mama was here, now how did her face end up in the pot? Amife began to talk. Mama Olana had not been seen in a week. She didn't even come for Sunday service. Even when she's sick, she sweeps the compound. Something is not right. And then it happened. Pastor Obieze came knocking. He wasn't just the spiritual leader of the village. He was also Mama Olana's prayer partner, her friend, and the one person who could sense something in the spirit was off. Olana opened the door, her face pale and her voice weak. Good afternoon, Pastor. He stepped slowly inside, his eyes scanning everything, the dusty curtains, the uneaten food on the table, and the untouched Bible. Where is your mother, Olana? She traveled to Newi, my uncle's place. He stared at her for a long time. Then he stepped towards her and said, your mother's spirit came to me in my dream. Olana froze. What? She stood beside a clay drum. Her mouth was open, but she didn't speak. Her eyes were begging me. Olana's leg trembled. I don't know what you've done, Pastor Obieze continued, his voice heavy. But if that woman's body is still in this house, the land will not rest. She burst into tears. She didn't confess. She couldn't. But that night she knew she had to act. She had to move the body. There was only one place left to hide the body. Deep behind the compound, beneath the old plantain tree, there stood a massive clay drum. A clay drum Mama had used long ago for collecting rainwater. It had not been touched in years, covered in spider webs and crawling with ants. At 3 a.m., when the village was silent, Olana dragged the body out, wrapped in 2 thick bed sheets and tied tightly with rope. She covered her mouth to keep herself from sobbing out loud. The drum was wide and hollow. Olana opened the lid and pushed the body in. It didn't fit at first, so she broke the shoulder and bent the knees. Then finally it slipped in. She covered the drum and poured dry leaves over it. Then she lit her kerosene stove beside it and made pepper soup, so that anyone who passed would only smell spices, but the earth had already taken root. Soon, the clay drum began to speak. It started as a whisper. At first, she thought it was just wind, but one night, while she was washing clothes behind the drum, she heard it clear and low. Olana. She dropped the bucket and ran, but the voice followed her even inside the house and in her dreams. What Olana didn't know was that Wamma was not a prophetess at all. She was a vessel, a tool, a spiritual trap laid decades ago by a river goddess banished from her shrine. Back in the 1960s, the elders of Uli, Wamma's village, had tried to silence the goddess by destroying her altar after too many young women began disappearing. But the goddess did not die. She moved, and she began to choose new vessels, young women desperately seeking help. She offered them knowledge, power, protection, but in exchange, she demanded one thing: secrecy and sacrifice. Olana had become one of those vessels without knowing it, and the moment Mama saw the pot, the sacrifice was no longer voluntary, it had become enforced. 1 week after hiding her mother's body, Olana went to the market. Her plan was simple: cook, act normal, blend in. She needed snail, okazi leaf and palm oil. But as she stepped into the market square, something strange happened. People turned to look at her. Some stared too long, others whispered. Then past Ifoma, a girl she grew up with. Ifoma's baby started screaming the moment she saw Olana. The baby screamed and screamed until she vomited. People gasped in shock. Ifoma looked at her with eyes wide open. Leave, Olana. Whatever is following you is not natural. Olana dropped her basket and ran home. That night, her mirror cracked on its own. Pastor Obieze returned. He couldn't rest. The vision of Mama Olana haunted him. He returned to the compound late one evening. But this time, he didn't knock. He stood at the back of the house, right beside the clay drum. He whispered a prayer, then laid his hand on the drum, and the drum trembled. He removed his hand quickly. He looked around, saw the dry leaves, smelled the faint stench, and then that was when he saw it. A white thread peeking from under the drum lid, the edge of a wrapper. He didn't need confirmation. He ran to the police post. By morning, the police were back, this time with authority. Inspector Okoro, Pastor Obieze and 2 local witnesses. They demanded to search the entire compound. Olana tried to resist. She tried to cry and lie, but they didn't listen to her. When they reached the drum, she fainted. It took 3 men to lift the lid, and when they did, the smell, the sight, the horror, everything hit them. Mama's body, half decomposed, eyes missing, mouth wide open. Everyone screamed. Olana was carried into the police van, kicking and weeping. I didn't mean to kill her. She saw what she shouldn't have seen. You don't understand. But no one listened to her. Amife had seen enough. The whole village watched as she was driven away. Some spat on the ground, others made the sign of the cross, but Pastor Obieze just stood in silence because he knew that this was not the end, It was only the beginning. 2 days after the arrest, the police sealed the compound. One officer stepped into the kitchen. The black pot was still in the fire unattended, still bubbling. He lifted the lid and nothing was inside. But a voice whispered, "She gave me a witness. Now I will find another cook." The prison cell was cold, not just from the cracked walls or rusted bars, but from the silence that surrounded Olana like a shroud. She sat on her wooden bench in the corner, knees tucked to her chest. Her white prison gown too thin for the harmattan air that crept through the cracks in the window. They had taken everything, her clothes, her dignity, her voice. All that remained were memories and the pot. Even here, behind bars, she could hear it, that low, watery bubbling, that whisper that she only seemed to notice. "You were chosen, you fed the drum, and now you must become it." She covered her ears and wept. The other prisoners thought she was mad, so they avoided her and they whispered at night, "She's the girl who cooked her mother. I heard she boils people alive. She speaks into the air like it's a god." They weren't far from the truth, but they didn't see what lived beneath the water. They didn't know what it meant to become the daughter of the drum. Flashback to when Olana first saw the drum spirit. She was only 15. It had come to her in a dream, disguised as her late father. He stood beneath the plantain tree, holding a white cock in one hand and a burning feather in the other. "Olana," he said, "you were born beside the river during an eclipse. The spirit marked you. You are a vessel." She had woken up screaming that night. Mama had run into her room praying and anointing the windows, but the dreams didn't stop. They simply grew more vivid, more demanding. And by the time she met Wamma, the path had already been led, the seed had been sown, her spirit was ripe. Back to the present day, Olana was brought into a small room with 2 plastic chairs and a flickering bulb for interrogation. Inspector Okoro sat across from her, arms folded and his face looking stern. "You've been in custody for 3 weeks. No lawyer, no visitor, no confession." Olana didn't respond. The inspector slammed a file on the table. "We found your mother's body. We found the pot. We have statements from your neighbors, your pastor, even the market seller. If you confess now, the court might show you mercy." Olana raised her head slowly, and for the first time she smiled. It was soft, gentle, but terrifying. "Inspector," she said in a calm voice, "do you believe in gods that walk in form of women?" He blinked. "What?" "Because that's what's coming. You think I'm the end of the story, but I'm just the beginning." The inspector leaned back, unsettled. "You sound like you've lost your mind." "No," she said. "I found it the moment I opened that pot." Ever since Olana was arrested, the village had grown uneasy. Goats stopped bleating at night. The children spoke of a woman walking down the road with a scarf over her face and blood on her hands. Crops began to dry even though it was the rainy season. Mama Neka claimed she saw fire burn inside Olana's empty kitchen and then vanish before her eyes. And worst of all, people began to go missing. First it was a hunter, then a teenager, then a village catechist. Each disappearance was marked by one strange clue, a broken cooking pot found at their doorstep. But unknown to them, one man had returned, but not as the woman they remembered. Years ago, one man had been a part of Amife community, a healer, a midwife, a woman with deep knowledge of roots and rivers. People trusted her. Women brought their children to her. Men came to her for portion and charms. But then, strange things began to happen. A newborn baby vanished in the night, last seen cradled in one man's arms. A woman who refused to pay for medicine was found dead with a clay pot shattered beside her. People grew afraid. Accusations flew. The village council summoned her. They demanded she renounce her practices and stop using river charms. She laughed in their faces. "I serve what you fear and fear what you serve," she said. And so the village cast her out. Her hut was burned, her compound cursed. Her only son Chisom, a quiet boy with a limp, was taken by his father's family and warned never to speak her name again. Wamma disappeared from Amife that night, and for years she was forgotten until now. She had returned in a darker, taller form, her body still, her eyes now fully white, her laughter hollow like the wind through a cave. She walked into the forest shrine and summoned the drum spirit. It came in smoke, in water, in a voice that sounded like thunder under a whisper. "Your daughter fed me. it said, but now she's bound. We must awaken the next. One man knelt before it and said, give me a name. And a name echoed, Ezike. Olana was dreaming again, but this time she wasn't in Amife. She stood in a wooden raft, floating through a black river. Around her were floating drums, each one bubbling like soup, each one whispering her name. She looked down and saw her own reflection, except it wasn't her. It was her mother, eyes open and mouth gaping. You became what I warned you against, Mama said from the water, and now you will become the drum. Olana screamed herself awake, but someone was in the cell with her, a woman wearing all white, with no eyes, just smoke where her face should be. The next morning, the prison wardens found Olana sitting in the corner of her cell, blood dripping from her nose, her hands shaking, and her cellmate, who had only been transferred the day before, dead. Body stiff, mouth open, eyes frozen in terror, and carved into her chest was one word, drum. Back in Amife, Pastor Obieze began to fast. He hadn't slept in days. He prayed until his knees bled. Then one night, during prayer, the heavens opened and he saw a vision. A river of blood flowing through the village. At the center stood Ezike, holding a ladle, stirring a massive pot. Behind her, hundreds of women, dancing and smiling, carrying drums on their head like market baskets. He saw babies crying. He saw men disappearing. He saw Olana standing in chains, carrying blood. He woke up with one word burned into his tongue. A thing does not end where it was beaten into shape. That Sunday, the clouds over Amife turned black before noon. Lightning struck the church gate. Snakes were seen crawling near the altar. A scream was heard from the women's fellowship room. Mama Neka had collapsed, foaming at the mouth. When they tried to wake her, she began to chant in a language no one had heard. Then she sat up slowly and said, I am the new drum, and the pot is hungry again. Amife was no longer a village of laughter. The skies remained grey even at dawn. The birds no longer sang. The women no longer cooked in front of their compounds, and the clay pots, once used for pepper soup and obolo, now lay shattered like secrets on clay sand. People whispered about the drum woman walking at night. They said her scarf never moved in the wind, that her shadow dripped blood, that she knocked 3 times on your door, and if you opened it before the last knock, you would never speak again. They called her Ezike, the new vessel, but few knew that Ezike had once been Mama Neka. Even fewer knew that Olana was alive and waiting. Inside the prison, it had been 2 months, 2 months since the death of Olana's cellmate, 2 months since she stopped speaking. The prison officers now feared her. They no longer called her out for head count. They no longer checked her cell at night, not after the cameras had showed something they couldn't explain. A shadow bending over her while she slept, a second face in the mirror, a pot sitting in her cell for 3 days even though no one brought it in. Olana had stopped resisting. She now understood her place. The drum doesn't end, it passes on. That was the last sentence she ever wrote in her prison journal. Then one day, just after midnight, a strange letter arrived, with no stamp, no handwriting, just one word, return. No one knew how Olana got out. One day she was in her cell, and the next day, gone. No broken locks, no alarms, only an empty wrapper left folded on the bench, and a trail of black feathers from her cell to the outer fence. The news reached Amife by evening. Pastor Obieze clutched his Bible tighter. She's coming, he panicked. Olana returned barefoot. She wore no makeup, no earrings and no pride. Just a torn white wrapper and a calabash in her left hand. She didn't walk in through the gate. She appeared at the foot of the old plantain tree, where the clay drum had once held her mother's body. She knelt, then she whispered, Mama, you can rest now. I came to end it. The village square was empty, except for one figure, Ezike, who was no longer Mama Neka. She wore a red dress now, soaked at the hem. Her eyes were white, her mouth smeared with ashes. She held a long ladle as long as her forearm. Behind her, a large clay pot bubbled, though there was no fire. Olana stepped into the square. The ground trembled. A drum beat from nowhere. Ezike spoke. You broke the chain when you refused the offering. The spirits are angry. Olana stepped closer and said to her, You fed on fear. You corrupted the pot. The pot was always hungry, Ezike said. I only obeyed. You turned it into a grave. A deep voice echoed from the pot. You will return to me. You stared me. You are mine. Olana opened the calabash. Inside it was her own blood. She lifted it high and poured it into the bubbling pot. Immediately the blood touched the pot. Light erupted from the clay. Ezike screamed and the spirits inside howled. Then Olana saw her mother, not dead, not angry, just peaceful. She stood beside the pot, eyes filled with sadness. My daughter, she said, you were born in pain, but you can die in peace. Let it end with you. Olana turned to Ezike. The pot demanded a soul. The spirit wanted to live through one of them, but not both, so she made a choice. Olana stepped forward, laid her hand on Ezike's shoulder, and whispered something only the spirits could hear. Then she walked straight into the pot. Fire erupted, the ground shook, and Ezike fell unconscious. The pot cracked, then shattered. The spirit screamed and vanished. The morning after the event, Amife woke up to silence, not the scary kind. The birds had returned. Smoke rose from the kitchens. The villagers stepped outside and saw Olana's body lying peacefully beneath the plantain tree, wrapped in white, mouth closed and a smile on her face. Ezike was never seen again. Some say she died, others say she wandered into the forest and became mist. 10 years later, a group of children went to fetch water from the river. They found a baby in a basket, wrapped in white with a red string tied to her ankle. Around the baby's neck was a tiny wooden drum. The girl was taken in, named Omalecha. She grew up with quiet eyes, and every night she stirred a pot no one else could see. The moral lesson of this story reminds us that power without understanding destroys. Olana tried to use something spiritual to escape her pain, and it almost consumed her entire village. Tradition must be handled with truth. When cultures hide evil behind rituals, spirits enter where wisdom was meant to dwell. Some gifts are curses in disguise. One man offered help, but it came with blood. Not every healer is holy. The dead carry stories the living don't understand. Mama Olana's warnings were not superstition, they were protection.